Welcome to the Redeeming the Dirt podcast. This is Noah Sanders. So excited to be with you today. Today I'm here with Rory Groves, and we're going to be talking a little bit about the topic of what does success look like in our lives and how to continually challenge ourselves to reevaluate as fathers, as leaders of our homes, as those that have families, and whether we're young people looking for the trajectory of our life as we're starting out, or we're casting vision for others, or we're talking about life lessons we learned. Whatever it is, it's very helpful to understand that we all have these assumptions of what success looks like in life, and sin affects that. The culture dictates things to us in what that should look like, but probably what God calls us to is a definition of success that is not our default and is definitely radical in this day and age. And it definitely looks different for each one of us because of our different missions God calls us to. But we need each other to challenge each other on what that looks like and how to measure that. So Rory has done a great job through the work that his family does. And I've really enjoyed his work. And I'm not going to go into that much right now because I really want him to talk about it, and how they are really encouraging families to pursue God in a special way through family economics. So, Rory, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, it's an honor to be here. Thanks for having me.
So let's go into I know we've had you on the show before. We talked about your previous book, Durable Trades. But for those who have not heard, or maybe won't go back and listen to that episode, I would encourage you guys to go find it and listen to it. But give us a bit of kind of a little brief introduction of yourself, how you got to doing what you're doing today, and then go into, for those who have heard the past episode, kind of an update. What's going on with your family? What's
Sure.
God doing through your ministry lately?
Well, I think so. I'm not sure when we did a podcast before. It probably was about 3 or 4 years ago, would be my guess. Durable Trades has been out for a few years now, and that was kind of the beginning of seeking a new way of life for our family. We moved down to the country. We bought 10 acres in southern Minnesota 13 years ago this summer, actually.
Wow.
So it was a huge change from us. We moved from 1/10 of 1 acre in the middle of South Minneapolis to literally 10 acres in southern Minnesota and tried our hand at farming. We're totally green at it. So everything that we were learning was as first generation farmers, which I'm sure a lot of your listeners can relate to. But one of the things along the way as we were living here is that we always were so excited about what we were learning. Like the first thing that we did was tap our maple trees the first spring, and for us it just was like, I don't know. I come from a tech background, and everything was so superficial, artificial, I guess is a better way to
Mm,
put it. It was
yeah.
all artificial and abstracted, and that just was my life. That was my career. And so there was something about farming, homesteading, the variety of things that we're involved with,
Hmm.
the working with our hands, the working with our families, knowing that this kind of work goes back centuries, maybe thousands of years. There was something that was like more meaningful to me, and it really began to open up this question as you started out this podcast with, what is success in my life? Is it building up a company that throws off a lot of cash, or is it measured in other things? And I
Mm,
knew instinctively that it's other things. I mean, there's enough
right.
people that you run into in business that say, you know, don't don't uh, don't climb a ladder if it's leaning against the wrong building.
Right.
Or they've gone through messy divorces, or they've had estrangement with their children and their grown children, and meanwhile they may be very successful businessmen or businesswomen, but they've lost those things that are very near and dear to them. And so
Mm,
you know this instinctively. I don't think anyone has to point this out, but yet we live in this world where it's kind of like the only measure of success is scale, is money, is
hmm.
portfolios, or this, just stuff, right? And so you're kind of constantly corralled into that. Well, maybe I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit, but to answer the question is, we really enjoyed this simpler life, but we
Mm,
felt it was like more deliberate, and we invited people to come along with us and learn alongside of us. And so, I mean, all the way back to the very first time we butchered chickens, to having garden tours, to the first time we were birthing, lambs and goat kids and learning all about these things. We just always looked for a way to make it into an event, like where we could invite our friends. And we did that for pretty much the whole time we've been here. Every year we've done some kind of gathering. And that kind of culminated after durable trades came out. It really opened a lot of doors for us to begin to share this message of the family economy. And we've
Mm,
started getting invited to homeschool conferences and homesteading conferences and writing about it, which is, we're delighted about all of that because this is something that we've lived through. We've seen the value of it. And we wanted to share that with as many people as possible. And so a couple of years ago, we founded Gather and Grow Ministries, my wife and I did. And that's kind of the umbrella organization that we run all of our events through. So Gather and Grow, we get together for a couple times a year for big events here on our property, or we're traveling on the road and speaking at other conferences and sharing all about this idea of the family economy, and how can we in the modern age bring families together for shared labor, shared work.
mm. Yeah, we've been working lately with some kids in an after school program in our local town using agriculture and some of our things that we've used with people over the years. And one of those things that we keep coming back to is we think about how do we create a pipeline of young people that
Mm.
can be open to agriculture, is really this idea of you've got to redefine what success is. Because if you're just going to go into agriculture or a more agrarian life and you're comparing it money wise to other occupations, it's not something that's attractive. But I like to ask him, well, what would you do if you had all the money in the world?
Mm.
And then the money is just that's just a way to get there. But if you could have through agriculture and or a homestead lifestyle or growing a bit of your food while you do whatever job you have, a bit of the life that you would have if you did have all the money in the world, then why would you despise that kind of thing? Because it
Mhm.
just doesn't make as much money, So it just starts to get them thinking about, what's really valuable in life. And yeah, actually family and yeah, actually
Mhm.
relationships and the what I get to do and the freedom that I have and all that kind of stuff that then helps them to see, what we're doing in the garden, what we're doing as a family, the
Mhm.
opportunities we have relationship wise as something a lot more valuable than they were looking at it according to the measure of success that the world kept throwing at them, And it's funny how
Absolutely.
the world has that double standard of we elevate and we romanticize the homesteading simple life, but then we
Mhm.
tell kids, you got to go get the highest paying job, be a lawyer, doctor,
Yeah.
person because you got to make a bunch of money, and so it's almost like double standard of
Yeah.
not really putting our time where we would say our heart is, which again is just part of that deception of I think a lot
Well,
of
and a
people
lot
want
of
to get
those,
to that eventually, but when I retire, but
yeah,
we're going to go this other route to be able to get there somehow, and we never do often.
I was just going to interject. A lot of those highest paying jobs as doctors and lawyers are oftentimes the most miserable jobs in terms of job surveys from the people in those professions.
Mm,
They're locked into, they've gone through how many years of schooling,
mm,
and then they get on the job and it's a grind. It's a
mm,
factory farm just transplanted into a medical community or a legal community. And the difference is they can't get out of it. I mean, they have hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt. I mean, they're locked in. And so I totally agree with you. And one of the really neat things with going to some of these homeschool conventions is the opportunity to speak to young people
yeah.
who are at that age of ninth grade, 10th grade or something, and talking to them like, there's a lot of pressure to choose a college or to choose a major or, to choose a profession or a career. And just consider for a minute, not just like what do you want your job to look like, but what do you want your life to look like? Like
Right.
what do you want your marriage to look like? What is the broader vision of where this is all going? Because vocation is an important, but it's a very small part of who you actually are.
Mm,
And it's so easy to get all consumed in these things. And when you're young, I mean, what are you supposed to do? You do what all the older people tell you to do. So we have, run into many of those situations where they wish they would have taken a different route, not gone to college, maybe learn a trade or just do something that would give them more freedom in life than being kind of locked into having to pay for this debt that they've accumulated because someone told them that that's what you're supposed to do.
Right. I was really blessed in so many ways by my dad and the mentorship that he gave me. But I remember one of the things that just had a huge impact on me when I was in high school is my dad said, so many people choose a career based on money and let that dictate their
Mm,
lifestyle. And he said, I would encourage you to figure out what's the lifestyle God's calling you to, and then just figure
mm,
out something that fits that would allow you to not only make money and provide for your family, but would facilitate that lifestyle in the first place. And I think
absolutely.
that's a really, important element that we have to think about. And I just see so many people, even in the farming world, like we love this idea of this lifestyle, but then we think to do it, we've got to make a living doing it, and then we've got to make a living
Mm,
doing it, we've got to scale and grow and hire and next thing you're just working in an office managing a bunch of people and you're not
mm.
actually doing any of the work that you don't have that lifestyle to because of kind of the growth model that you're following. And I think that's really,
That's right. Yeah.
helpful to
Scale
reevaluate.
Scale is a very slippery slope. I mean, on some level you have to scale.
Hmm.
On some level you need to divide and conquer and in some of those things. But it has gotten so out of hand in the age of the internet and technology, and that's kind of the default direction. You know, an influence for me has been Wendell Berry, who
Yes.
if any of your listeners have not been immersed yet, I encourage you to get some of his books. He writes both fiction and nonfiction, but get a book of compilation of his essays like The Unsettling of America and just start chewing on that. And the thing that I'm really impressed about with this man is that he certainly has had his time in the spotlight. You know, much of his prophecies from the 70s and 80s have been fulfilled by now. And yet he resists trying to leverage things into some kind of big organization and make a name for himself. Um, and he resists the scale of the thing. He's still going out and tending his sheep and tending his farm, and he's
Mm,
still working with his wife, and they're writing manuscripts, and she's the editor, and so they've managed to keep the family scale. And I do see oftentimes what might start out as a family business can grow beyond, the range of that. And it's not bad. It's not bad necessarily, but you just have to recognize there's a cost to that. And if the justification for what you do is, the worldly success is the money and the largesse or the scale, it's not necessarily going to yield you the results that you actually want in the end. So, those are all just kind of cautionary examples of it's possible, it's certainly possible, but it's certainly against the grain to think this way when our whole culture is just saying, get big or get out, right?
right. Well, and the challenge with all this is as we really think of the idea of freedom, and especially as Christians, we want to have the freedom to live like God wants us to. Our culture says your value is determined by your consumption.
Mm,
The more you can buy, the more expensive your house is, the more expensive your car is, your income, how much, your income is relative to, it's assuming you're buying everything, right? You're making 100,000, $200,000 a year. It's all like that will allow you to purchase. So that's kind of how your value is equated. But freedom is one of those things that you can't actually farm out or purchase
mm,
or pay somebody else to create for you. It's only something that you can have
mm,
through personal responsibility, both
mm,
spiritually through Christ. He gives it to you, right? When you have a personal responsibility. And then it's something that, uh, the wealthiest people in the world, like the more you go to that scale where you're farming it out and you're paying for everything, it's a very much more fragile existence because you're more and more dependent on anybody that you're doing business with in that way. And I think that's we'll probably talk about it later, but that's that whole idea of in Revelation where it talks about the mark of the beast and the
mm,
control that will come through not being able to buy or sell. It implies that control is possible because people
mm,
are buying everything that they
mhm,
need, right? But even in just a lifestyle wise, if you work for somebody in exchange for money and you buy, and then you're limited to, like, you can't dictate your lifestyle too much because you're
Hmm.
there to serve their vision, and your lifestyle has to fit how you're fitting into that. And then the, your lifestyle is also dependent on what's available to purchase
Yeah.
based on the income you're getting from that, which is not always, you're kind of stuck with what you've got. So helping us understand that, you know, I think that's why a lot of people, even that are very wealthy, are interested in different lifestyles and getting land in the country and, all these kind of,
Hmm.
when they want to purchase the ready-made homestead and things. And it's like, why would you want, you've got all this money, why would you do that? Well, they realize there's a
Hmm.
fragility, and a
Hmm.
shallowness to what you can actually have and purchase. Not only this, the money's fragile because it could disappear
Hmm.
through inflation or whatever, but the access to the services and goods that you purchase from that could also disappear tomorrow. And it helps you to understand that the freedom that you have is not really there. And that's where if we
Yeah.
can cast a vision for the sacrifices that personal responsibility take.
Hmm.
Simple life often means more humiliating life, or I
Mm.
say humble, but it requires
Yeah.
humiliation, right? To be
Absolutely.
limited, to live within your means budget wise, to live within the energy that our solar panels can make on a daily basis, or
Mm.
whatever it is humbling. But there's a good thing that that does to us as individuals, and then as we're raising our families as well. So, if you could touch on quickly
Hmm.
the concept behind your durable trades book, because I think
Yeah.
I actually don't have a copy of yours right now because I your kind of books I'm always giving away or lending out, and so I never have one of them around anymore. So it's
Here,
yes,
I
please
brought
tell
one
us
right
about
there.
that because I love this book.
So, this book was my own personal quest, I guess I'd call it, where we had been on the farm for several years. I had experienced the contrast between farm life, which is, a primitive way of life. Not that it was primitive, but I mean it goes back to primitive times. And my high tech job, which is what I never planned to change that when we moved to a farm. I just thought, I'd be home officing and I did. That's exactly what I did. But when I started to taste, I guess you could say, the freedom, the connectedness that I had with my family, that was the huge one for me was this idea that, it used to be where you would have someone would learn a trade or a skill, a blacksmith or something like that, and they would train their children would train their children, and it would go on for generation after generation after generation. And there is examples, few and far between, but there's examples of companies that have been within the family for 10 centuries in old Europe.
So cool.
And I just was thinking, my entire profession goes obsolete every couple of years. I have to constantly retrain. I mean, there's nothing I could, after 20 years of working in a professional capacity, there's nothing I could teach my children that would be useful to them when they become of age. And I couldn't build a business, at least not in high tech, that would have any kind of a lifespan that would be generational. And I just started to think of there's the longevity, the stability of the kind of work I'm doing. There's the connectedness with my family, or I could say the disconnectedness, because there wasn't really a way my family could work with me. And I just started to ask those questions.
Mm.
And basically it just came down to this is, are there any jobs left in the modern era where families can build something that's going to last and do it together? That was my burning
Mm.
question. And so what I ended up doing like I knew that there was farmers are out there, but I just didn't feel like I was going to be able to make a full-time income being a farmer. So were there any other jobs so I
Hmm.
started researching. I came up with a list of 61 historical professions, and then I ranked them top to bottom on the basis of the historical stability, how family centered they are, how many barriers there are to entry. Is it a super capital intensive kind of a company to start up, or can you start it fairly easily? And I just kind of went through all the historical research, and what I did is I started before the Industrial Revolution, because to me, and
Mm.
not just to me, the Industrial Revolution was the defining moment when it comes to vocation in the modern age. That is really what changed. When you talk about scale, I mean,
Hmm.
that was scale.
Right.
And for thousands of years before that, uh, life went on pretty much the same way in terms of it was family scale agriculture. People were farming for subsistence, for their, for their own needs. When it moved into the factory, that's where we have all of society reorients itself around this way of work. And so for the purposes of answering this question that I was thinking on, it was, well, what are there any jobs left that were pre-industrial?
Mm,
And that's where I kind of set as my litmus test. Because if it's survived from the pre-industrial times to today, that would automatically put it in that very narrow, category of historically stable professions. And so what I found was that the professions that are the most stable also are the most family centered. They're the ones who, in
mm.
other words, the ones that are involved with just basically making a living for your family and not trying to grow crazy beyond that actually endured much better than even other pre-industrial professions that maybe are they're ancient, but they're not family centered. So I have them
Right.
all in the book and I rank them and then I kind of do a summary of each one and score them according to these different things. But that was the book that I put out and that is actually was the basis of why we're doing what we're doing now.
Well, as I have sons that are getting older, my oldest just turned 14. I know he's a little younger than your son. Just this idea of casting a vision for them of what these trades are, that could fit what their passions are for their lifestyle. The moving forward is very exciting, and I just love. I mean, obviously, several of the first ones on that list are, shepherd and farmer and
Mhm.
that kind of thing. And then, but you have things like midwife, which is
Mhm.
an interesting one, even though it's not as family friendly as some of the other ones because of the travel involved. But then there's innkeeper. We love the idea of
Yep.
eventually starting some Airbnbs on our farm here
Yeah.
and doing some things like that. So it really gets your juices going in terms of what things you can do. So why don't we go ahead and go into you have a little bit of a new season that you're starting with your
Yep.
ministry, and what does that kind of look like?
So the biggest news lately is that we're starting to move in the direction of publishing. Like we have felt that the Lord has been leading us in this direction of opening a publishing house specifically to try to get more resources out there for families. We host these events, and we hear from a lot of families all the time. I mean, all the time. We also have a newsletter that we've been running actually for I think it's going on about 9 or 10 years now. But so we connect with people through that as well. But one of the main needs that we're feeling right now is just to generate more resources. And I mean, write more books, reach out to other authors and start to get more content out there about the family economy because it is
Hmm.
such a foreign concept for so many people, but it's a very real possibility and people are doing it. You just mentioned innkeeper. That is, I would say, probably one of the number one ways that families have been able to create a family-centered economy and actually make some pretty good money doing it is by opening up, in the hospitality, short-term rentals kind of an area. And so there's certainly options out there. And what we have a heart to do is to try to connect with people on that level, just for one, to help people move forward if they feel like this is something God's calling them into. But secondly, to impact the culture, to
Hmm.
just start to get this idea out there. And so what I've been telling people is I want to write children's books. Or I mean, I want to
Yeah.
have children's books written. I want to tell stories about families working together and just begin to penetrate the culture with, hey, this is possible. Yeah, I read about it. Or other fiction books or other how-to books. Maybe do some historical books, but just across genres talk about the family economy in a way that's very accessible. And so we knew that this bigger vision was going to require more than just putting out a book or two every couple of years, that we were going to need to team up with other authors.
Mm.
We were going to need to have a lot more muscle behind it, so to speak. And so that's why we felt like this is the right time, it's the right season for us, and we're moving forward with starting a publishing house as part of the ministry with Gather and Grow.
That is super exciting. I know for our
Which
family,
is, by
finding
the way, it's one of the trades in the book is publisher. So
publishing, okay.
it has changed quite. I mean, publishers out there are going to laugh and say, "You think that's As a matter of fact, it is, but it takes on different forms. And there's all kinds of ways you can publish. I mean, you're publishing a podcast right now. There's unique ways that you can do it. And small publishers actually have a decent play going forward because so many of the traditional publishers are locked into old ways and they can't be quite as nimble. So there is, especially in this day and age, sorry, I'm getting ahead again, but in this day and
No, go.
age where we feel like, the truth is being censored, we can see that happening on all the
Hmm.
platforms. Becca likes to say we feel that starting a publishing house is a forward-looking solution to the writing on the wall. We want to be able to speak the truth in an uncompromising way and not
Yes.
have it kind of surrendered or edited by gatekeepers.
Hmm. Exactly. Yeah, and it's as we look as stewards of the day and age we live in, we have access to technology that could destroy families and destroy lives, but at the same time could be used just like technologies like the printing press or roads or anything else in history have been used by God to advance the gospel in
That's
unprecedented
right.
ways. We
Yeah.
have to engage in that way to see how do we be faithful with that. And that kind of will bring up some discussions related to the book that we're going to be talking about. So y'all are doing a Kickstarter for your first
Right.
kind of book that I'm super excited about because it's one I've has been really impactful for our family. So please tell us
Mhm.
about this first project that y'all have going, and we want to get people excited about being a part of it.
Cool. Well, thank you. So the book is called Henry and the Great Society. And it's an old book that's out of print. And we came across it through kind of a circuitous route. But when we read it, it was so powerful to us that we just felt like this needs to be, if we do go into publishing, and at that time we didn't know what we were going to be doing, but if we do, this is going to be the first book that we publish.
Mm,
And so, fast forward a couple of years, we were able to get in touch with the copyright holder and tell them our story, that we and tell them about our ministry and what we're doing in ways that we're trying to help families come together. And they were very supportive of what we were doing, and they sold us the rights to republish this book. And so, what makes this book so unique is that it tells a story of kind of like a mid-century, like a 1940s family, 1950s family that is kind of at the very end of that old way of life. In other words, they're in a community that is still functioning like a pre-industrial community. The people are still farming. They don't have electric lines yet. They don't have all of the modern conveniences. And it tells the story of the slow unraveling of that as modern conveniences come to town. And it circles around this one family in particular, which is Henry Morgan. So that's where the name of the book, Henry in the Great Society, comes from. So Henry is a generational farmer. He had inherited the farm that his grandfather originally moved to, back during the Civil War, and raised his family there. And then he's the third generation taking on that farm. And slow and sure, things begin to come into their community and change it, all in the name of progress. And so it's just a fascinating book. It's a quick read, it's a short novel. It was written by a man named H.L. or Herbert Rausch, and he was actually a minister. He actually used to travel around on horseback in the Appalachia and preach at different parishes and things like that. But anyway, it was really kind of a summary of his story and what he had seen in his lifetime. So it's a very powerful story, and it's a true story in the sense that many family farms experience this, but the
mm.
novel itself is not biographical. It's a work of fiction. But so that was published in 1969. It's gone out of print. It was a very popular book in its day. And so what we're trying to do is bring it back into print as kind of the initial, this is what we want to do. These are the kinds of books that we want
Mm.
to put out there as a publishing house. And we're super excited about it.
I think I don't remember when the first time I read Henry and the Great Society, but I know it was um, over about probably a decade ago at least, and uh, well, more than a decade. So it's probably right after we got married, which has been 15 years ago now. We read it just as a PDF online, and I
Mm,
remember my wife reading it to me because I wanted her to experience it as well while we were driving somewhere on some trip.
mm,
And it's storytelling is so powerful. And that's what I love about this book is it can describe the beauty and of really a life that is centered around the things that God says are good and wholesome, land, family, good work, community,
Mm,
simple, the joys and of rest and fun with family and all that kind of stuff that just paints this really, it's not too idealistic, realistic, honestly,
mm,
it's pretty, like you said, a pretty honest description of what used to be. And then when you see that slowly dismantled bit by bit, unintentional, like without
mm.
there ever being this decision to move away
Yeah,
from that or ever this understanding of what was really happening. I remember my wife just stopping partway through and just weeping, like in the
yeah,
car with the
yeah.
computer in her lap. And then a few years later, we read it together as a
Mm,
family,
mm,
and my kids, like literally wept. My oldest son, he was just
mm,
weeping. He was like, wow, like just the when you
mm.
see the loss, I think that's what's so special about this book is we live kind of in that progress,
Yeah,
like post progress where we don't really know what's been lost. And this book helps you to kind of have that homesickness for something that
mm,
most of us have not experienced in our lifetime that wasn't that uncommon, throughout history, even for those people who, especially in the US and Europe, where it was, we had the Protestant kind of work ethic, Christian worldview applied even to those that weren't necessarily born again. We had a culture that was defined by those values.
mm.
There was a lot of a beautiful fruit from that, and I think the conviction of listening to this story is understanding how much impact the uh, how much was changed of Henry's and his family's life by these simple conveniences.
Yeah. The good things in life is what he
It's
says.
not like they chose per se to adopt a different philosophy or a different way of life. They just said yes to certain things that helps, challenge us of what am I saying yes? What are the effects of what
Mm,
I'm saying yes to? I think that's what the Amish have been, they kind of got to a certain point in, if you rewound a couple hundred years, the Amish wouldn't look much different than
you're right.
a lot of people, but they came to a certain point and said, beyond this point, we see a negative
Yeah.
effects to adopting these things, even though they would make our life easier. There's a lot more valuable things than ease
Yeah.
in life. So that to me is where we've shared this book with quite a few people because it's powerful. One of my family members actually, we shared this book with them. And the next thing I know, we were looking on Facebook and they're like, free washer and dryer. We were giving away our washer and dryer. And we're like, whoa, whoa, that's pretty radical, because part of what they were thinking about of how they could make changes, which I don't necessarily recommend everybody get rid of their washer and dryer, but it's beautiful to see what uh that
Well, yeah,
in it's the you want something better than that. It's not that you're opposed to the
yeah,
washer and dryer, you're seeking to experience something that
yeah.
offers to be even better.
Yeah, and you said earlier, and I think this is spot on, is that the book is a tool. It's a tool to begin a conversation to another way of life.
Right.
Ultimately, at the end of the day, it's not the specific conveniences themselves
Mm-mm.
that are causing the breakdown. It's we've kind of ceded our priorities to something that's worldly. And it might involve getting rid of, some things. Maybe smartphones aren't a good idea, or maybe you just need to put more limitations around some of the things. But in any event, it's a book that makes such a deep impact on people. And we've seen the same thing too, is kind of as we've been going down this road of publishing, we've been connecting with people here and there, and the people that have heard of this book or have read it in when it was previously available, uh, they were very impacted by it. That seems to be a very consistent response to it. It made them stop and think and take stock
Mm-hmm.
of their lives.
Mm-hmm.
And I've talked to some Amish even that have said they read the book once a year, and they're already Amish.
uh,
But just to try
yeah.
to be, reflect on where are we,
Hmm.
what's truly important. And that to us is really what this is all about. I mean, what the book is describing, everything you're talking about right here today is what we're trying to do as a ministry. We're trying to reverse those trends. Like we're trying to
Hmm.
deal with those issues of modernity and
Mm.
how it's separated families. And so the book is perfect as a beginning conversation of what can we do and bring it back home. Ultimately, it was the end of the home. You know, I write about this in the other book, Family Economy, but the home used to be the principal factory of society. That's where all the production took place, was at home with your family.
Mm.
And it's no longer the center place. Now we all leave home. One of the A Crisis of Our Age by Patiram Soroka, and he says the home has become an overnight parking place. You know,
Hmm.
we come in here, you know, you watch some television, you sleep overnight, and then everyone's out again the next day. And that's very different. That did not used to happen until very, very recently. I mean, we're talking 50, 60 years ago. Then back for 5,000 years, it was the home. And so I think these are the things that really motivate Beck and I, and what we're trying to do in wake up society, I guess you could say, or just families one at a time
Mm.
to these issues, and to try to take stock of what can we do to bring it back home and to grow stronger as a family in the process.
Mm. When I wrote my book, Born Again Dirt, several years ago, my big motivation in doing that was to raise awareness for what I feel like is a spiritual battle
Mm,
for uh, how we approach food production. And I think this book raises the same question because you had Henry and his family were kind of going down this road to enslavement that they didn't realize the risk.
mm,
And so it's not that you can't, have a washer and dryer or have a smartphone or have these kind of things, but sometimes uh, we need to be challenged to be intentional and be prayerful about where we draw the line, because I think all of us would agree. And what his challenge at the end of this book is not only a story, but it also has some summary kind of, maybe you'd say sermonette kind of chapters at the end of what his conclusions are of how what we should learn from this story. And part of that is just this idea of he was like, there's this beast system in a sense that he saw in his day and age of
mm.
enslavement that I'm like, the 60s? I mean, this is before the internet or any of these things that he
Yeah,
still saw it like this
yeah,
shackles, like that just, and it's sort of like, man, what would he think about today? But again, we go back
yeah,
to that stewardship issue. We still have to live, as stewards of what we've been given access to today.
absolutely.
But just like the Amish would say, we draw the line right here, and we feel like for what how God defines success, this would hurt more than help what
Mm,
we value as a community. We may not feel like in our family that that's where we draw the line per se, but we need to ask, where do we draw the line? Because we're not just
yeah.
riding the train all the way to its destination along with the world. And I think that's a bit of what Henry and his family happened to do. Is they ended up getting on a train that was going a place that they didn't even know where it was
Yeah,
going.
that's exactly
And it
right.
wasn't that they couldn't have, you know, if they had been aware of the battle
Hmm.
and the way in which they needed to be making decisions, they could have handled the progress that came to town without it
Hmm.
necessarily destroying their family. But because it was kind of that blind side, not something that any generation had had to really deal with much in the past, they ended up falling into the trap that ended up destroying their family. And I think that's where this book is a very good tool to help us to start trying to answer that question for ourselves, is where are we not being aware of the battle, and what are the discussions we need to have as a family about where we need to draw the line or haven't drawn the line, that we need to, like you said, maybe you need to get rid of your washer and dryer just to evaluate where you are. And then, like my family members, now they've got some back again, but it's allowed them to adjust, or
Hmm.
get rid of your iPhone for a little bit. I've done that in the past. And then you have it back and you can be more intentional just to understand, what are you enslaved to? What owns you and what do you own? And how are we living as slaves to Christ, or are we unintentionally being limited by our blind adoption of what's available to us around us?
And I would add to that, where are you going? as a
Right.
family? Like, where are you ultimately going? Do you have a vision for your family? And it, taking on some of these, are these technologies or are these conveniences moving you closer to where you want to be as a family?
Right.
Some of the just even being forward thinking and looking towards the future generations, that's a biblical mentality. It is not a worldly mentality. The
Hmm.
worldly mentality is to live for the weekend, and to store up debt for your grandchildren. But
Yeah.
a godly perspective would say we want our grandchildren to be better equipped than we were. We're going to sacrifice now so that they can enjoy the fruits later. But there's all kinds of things in that. And so I would say that that's a huge part of this is sometimes you can get so wrapped up in your work and your job and the busyness and the schedules that you actually never get around to figuring out where you're going as a family. And I mean,
Mm.
when you're in the thick of things, you can lose years can go by and you haven't made movement towards your goals. So that's modernity. That's the constant barrage of all the distractions, and that's very takes a prominent role in the book. Is all the different distractions that are keep coming up that just seem like they're just a couple here and there, but somehow they tend to sap all the strength out of the characters, and we can in a way that we can all relate to. So I mean, I think just going back to something that you said earlier about those closing chapters, one of the things that we're doing with the book that I'm really excited about is I'm taking those closing chapters and I'm interacting with them in a new afterword.
Mm.
So I will the whole goal is not to just leave people in a place of discouragement, of course, but we want to give them the beginning steps of what to do about it. And
Mm.
that's what our ministry is. And so we're like, we don't know where God's going to take you, but we know where you can begin.
Right.
And so I'm really excited. I'm going to be able to kind of use those back portions that were the concluding chapters that Roush wrote about and interact with them and share, our reflections of what we've seen that has been working for families and really what is underlying a lot of these things, more of the fundamental kind of structural changes that fortunately you don't have to wait for someone to come along and pass, laws or elect certain Supreme Court judges. You can do these things in your family tonight. It begins at home, and that's our main push is that it's that personal responsibility that you talked about. But there are real answers out there, and there is grace for all of this, but it does take a conviction. And so I'm looking forward to doing that. Oh, and also I forgot, in the way that the Kickstarter campaign works is we've set up different tiers. So you can get the book, or you can get the book like a couple copies of the book and get a group discussion guide. So we're putting together a
Mm.
discussion guide if you want to do a small group or do it in your family or do it with some friends. But when you talk about making decisions, don't leave out making decisions as a community, like in your church. It would be wonderful to have churches talking about these things of like, instead of just leaving everyone up on their own to try to figure out it. I know it's a ball of what would you say, a can of worms once you start going down that path. But the reality is, as churches, we need to be discussing these things and we need to be asking our questions like, is AI good for us? Well, what are the nuance? Let's get some thinkers on this. Let's talk about this. But let's do some of these things together as a community because you can't just in isolation make decisions about this or that technology. You're going
Mm.
to be impacted. Your children are going to be impacted based on what your brothers and sisters in Christ do. So for all these reasons, so we've put together different tiers of things, and it's going to be fun. I've even got Ivor and Elsie. They're working on some handicrafts that they're going to include in as like certain levels of givers. So we're having a good time with it. Our whole family's going in on it on with like a lot of different things. Yeah, I just would encourage everyone if they're interested in this at all to come and check that out. And we would love your support because all proceeds from this fundraiser will help us get up on our feet to begin publishing more books like it.
Mm. So when this podcast drops, the Kickstarter will be live, and what is the like when does it conclude? Like when do people need to get
So,
involved
sure.
and to be able to help fund this? Because the way Kickstarter works, for those of you who are
Yes,
not
it's a
familiar, you
limited
basically
time.
have like you've got to raise, you have a certain goal for what you want to raise to be able to complete the project. And then you have a short window. And if you get enough people to support and fund the project to that amount by the time, then it's a successful project and it's funded. If you don't reach
Right.
that goal, then it is not the basically nobody's charged and you don't actually do the project. So it's important that those of you who are interested that we if you're interested in supporting seeing this project come to life, that you get over there to the Kickstarter page and support it within that window. So tell us what the shut off window is. I'm sure if people are listening to this after the fact, hopefully it will have been successful and they can go get the book. But for those that are listening when this drops, when do they need to have that to go check that out
Sure.
by?
So I would just say if you're getting this, so it runs for 30 days, but please do it at the beginning of the campaign, because the way that it works is that the more that signups that we have early on in the campaign, the more like visibility it gets for the duration of the campaign. And
Gotcha.
if we don't raise enough support to for the minimum, then it doesn't move forward at all.
Mm.
The whole thing is canceled. So it's an all or nothing is what they call that. So 30 days, it ends on November 6th is the last day. So hopefully folks are getting this before then, but don't wait until November 6th. Come early and check it out. And the different reward tiers have certain limits. We can only, Ivor can only make so many tractor kits. So there's not going to be a unlimited number of rewards available, but that would be it. And then the best way to do it is, I think, probably just go to Kickstarter.com and search for Henry and the Great Society. You should see the book come up in the search bar. We also have our website for our ministry is gatherandgrow.us, and we've got a link right there, and you could learn more about the ministry there as well.
Awesome. So you guys go to Kickstarter. I'm gonna go myself. I've been waiting for it to go live, so it would can't wait to get on there and do that. Search Henry and the Great Society and support this project. You know, one of the challenges we have sometimes when we're trying to talk to people about these issues, or people are asking us about what our family is doing, is, how do you broach the subject? How do you kind of wake people up to thinking differently than they normally do? And like in the disciple making world, you'll talk about, for there to be change in a community, you've got to have three different things that outweigh the inertia of the status quo, and that is discontent with the status quo,
Hmm.
plus knowledge of a better way,
Hmm.
plus a practical pathway to make change from the status quo to the better way. And so this book does a great job of all three of those, with your addition of the practical steps at the end. Before, it was a good, here's the knowledge of a better way, discontent with the status quo, but it left you with a bit of, what do you do next? So your
Yes,
guys'
exactly.
ministry coming together to be able to now have practical examples and steps that families can take makes this an incredibly valuable resource for people to use, not only with their own family, but to be able to hand to other people and then have
Hmm.
a conversation starter. So super excited about this. So I really appreciate you coming
Cool.
on, Rory, and sharing about this. Super excited about the updates from your
Awesome.
family and what God's doing. Look forward to maybe be able to see you again sometime soon at a conference or something. And
Yeah.
any closing final thoughts that you have for our listeners?
I would just say, it all matters. Everything that I get the homesteading, it's harvest time right now, and it's tired, and there's we're at my family's out there canning beets right now, and I get it. It's a slog, but I think you have to don't ever forget the purpose in it. And the purpose is that we're doing something, that we're preserving something for future generations. Even if it's hard and against the grain right now, there's a lot of us out there, and just be encouraged and keep moving forward one day at a time. It's all going to be worth it. Everything that you invest right now in your children and in your family is going to be abundantly worthwhile down the road. So that would be my encouragement in this harvest time season.
That's great. Well, we always love to close with having any of our guests just pray a
Mm,
blessing over our audience, and then I'll wrap up.
absolutely. Heavenly Father, Lord, we just thank you so much for the Sanders family and for the family that he connects with on a regular basis. Lord, anyone who's listening to this, I pray your blessing to be upon them. And I pray, God, most of all, that your conviction would be upon them, that you would clarify to them the next step in their journey, wherever that is, whatever you put on their heart. Give them hope and a future, Lord, and give them the next step. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Well, thank you everybody for listening. This has been Noah Sanders with Rory Groves. And until next time, encourage you to be humble, to be faithful and to keep redeeming the dirt. God bless.